The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, TechBytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
Welcome to another episode of TechBytes, and today's conversation is probably one of many conversations over the years. And I'm joined in conversation with Mike Nettles, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Zaxby's Franchising, otherwise known as Zaxby's. And I wish I could tell you it's been a long time since we had a conversation, but we had one last week at the National Restaurant Association's Table Conference. So welcome to TechBytes.
Thanks, Rob. I'm glad to be here. And yeah, it seems kind of odd for I used to run into you all the time. We didn't run into each other for a long time. And then I've seen you more probably in the last 4 months than in the last 4 years. So it's nice to be with you.
That is so weird because I was thinking the same thing. Yeah. And, you know, it's funny, even though I've known you a long time and I didn't really figure out how long I've known you until you started spouting off some things during our session at the conference. But I realized that I'm always learning new things about you because I didn't know, for instance, at one time, I didn't know some of the boards you were on. And I know you as a technology operator in many fields. I have known that you've done the vendor side of it. And I think you might have had a stint in retail, but I knew nothing about cranes. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
What's cranes?
For a while during COVID, I just rolled off of Papa John's and was kind of, thinking about what comes next. And I got a phone call from a colleague of mine over at a private equity firm who said, look, essential construction jobs and so forth are still open and viable during the COVID lockdown. And we kind of need to make hay while the sun is shining. So we own a crane rental company. And I know that has nothing to do with pizza or chicken or salads or anything else maybe you've ever worked in, but it has a fairly common theme, a very old business, a lot of roll-ups, a lot of technology that is ancient, that doesn't talk to one another, still a lot of paper-based businesses. You think you could go maybe check in on it and give us some thoughts. And, that turned into a kind of a fractional CIO role for a better part of probably about 10, 11 months until eventually through another colleague, I ended up working with Goldman on the what ended up being the acquisition of Zaxby's. And I've kind of been here ever since. But
just out of curiosity, was there some learning that you got from the crane business that should be applied to us? I mean, I know that people order cranes and they have to be delivered somewhere. So maybe that's like a pizza. I don't know.
They're very big, very expensive pizzas. The big thing I would probably point to is how similar all businesses are, regardless of the types of products or services that they sell. In the case of restaurants, particularly table service, which, is kind of where I grew out of initially, you got a guest who orders off of a menu, but they always want it kind of made their way. So hold the pickles, hold the onions, 86 this, and bring me this as before the meal, whatever. Crane rentals are multi-million-dollar deals, but it's the same thing. I got to lift something a certain weight and reach it out a certain distance, and I need to do it so many times per day, and you're still trying to solve for X. And so the same kind of configuration management, in fact, that was one of the things we ended up building there, was kind of a mobile app that became more or less the order taker, the point of sale for leasing multi-million-dollar crane deals. Because no two jobs are exactly the same, even if they're all basically renting the same cranes out of the fleet. So I could tell you some other things. It's a very, very,
Wait.
kind of.
I got to ask you a question because I'm fascinated by this. So, are we talking about the cranes that are like the long stick thing that somebody sits all the way up there?
Oh yeah.
All right.
You're talking everything.
Go ahead.
You basically have truck cranes. Those are the more common ones you see for like daily jobs that need to, move an air conditioning. But then you're going to have tower cranes, which are the permanently constructed or semi-permanently ones that are constructed while they're building skyscrapers or over stadiums. They'll sit over there on the skyline for, months.
Or they build a building around it.
You got it. And the giant crawler cranes, there aren't a lot of those in the world, actually. We own more than almost anybody. But these crawler cranes on treads that are so heavy and weigh so much, to ship them to where you need them to go is a convoy of trucks. Then you actually have to build something. You have to take soil samples from engineers. You get a bunch of mechanical engineers that measure how much weight these things are going to displace. and you have to build what we call dance floors for them, which are temporary floorings for the crane to operate on. And of course, all of that goes into the job of renting a crane. And it used to be salespeople with big, giant, thick catalogs of a bunch of metrics and so forth that have to figure out all the components. And we kind of built a mobile app and a point of sale
And you
that
can't
let
have
them
those
do
things
that.
like falling down. Well, so here's the question I really want to ask you. First of all, did you ever get to climb up one of those towers to go up to the top?
I've been up in a tower crane before. That was one of the first thing I asked
And you
to
have
do
to
was
climb
take
it,
me up in
right?
one. Right. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And my
It,
understanding is once you get up there, they pretty much stay up there all day because there's no bathroom.
yeah, pretty much. I won't get into all the graphic details, but for the purposes of the work shift, they're pretty much going to be up in their little crow's nest, and they take breaks up there. And there's technology that goes into that because this is usually union labor that you're working with, and you have to know when they're on break and when they have to take their mandatory breaks. Even very unique kind of labor models, which we have in the restaurant world. Is somebody a cook? Are they cooking over a fryer? Are they serving? They might have a differentiated wage rate. We had to figure out wage rates based upon the risk of what they were doing. So if you extend the boom, the neck of the crane out so far, you earn this much per hour. But if you extend it beyond the normal realms, you now takes a higher skill, then you actually get an accelerant. So we had all these telemetrics built into the cranes to track what the crane
So
was
it's like
doing
more
so that
skill
we could pay
level,
different.
right?
You got
It's
it.
not a higher risk if you work the fryer, but it's like the skill level. But I got to tell you that while it may sound like we're off track here and we started off track, we're really not because besides the uplifting conversation we're having right now, if you think about it, you're pointing out how metrics can be moved from industry to industry and how there are learnings there. And in a serious comment, you came from Papa John's, and we know that all the people, all the pizza places are testing drone delivery. I don't know, but I'm going to guess that somebody has tested taking one of those drones and flying it up and delivering a pizza up to the
Probably.
top of somebody who's operating the crane.
Yeah, more than likely somebody has already managed to do it, if not as a practical thing, as a marketing play, right? I mean, there are a lot of cool things that you can do with the drone technology, with self-delivery technology now, that you wouldn't otherwise think the ability to do. In fact, it's interesting. One of the things I learned in the crane business, I've since applied on the technology side. We always use GPS positioning and so forth for delivery driver tracking and
Right.
defined delivery routes at Papa John's. When you sell a franchise, you actually sell a defined delivery route, and that only that store can service that particular route. Which is why, by the way, most digital journeys in the restaurant business start off with asking, "Is this to go or is this for pickup?" Because we want to align you to the store that's going to be servicing you. Very different from ordering off of apple.com where everyone gets charged the same price. And so there's no such thing as trying to position you towards, the brand outlet that's going to service you until you get to the end of the transaction. So coming back from the crane business, it really made me realize, wow, we always needed to know GPS positioning of all these really high dollar assets. How many more places can GPS actually start to play a role in the organization for things like identifying not just the guest and the traffic, but make ready times and a lot of other things where in the past maybe we made all those time based, location based, and particularly location
Right.
based activities around the mobile app really is how you can start to get a razor like focus on making sure that food is as hot and fresh as it possibly can be.
Well, it's funny because sometimes you actually have to look at another industry or visit another industry to actually see how they're used. We had this conversation last week that sometimes you see technologies that are used somewhere else, and that's where you get, the aha moment, or you say, "Oh, wait a minute, they're doing it that way." The very fact in some of those sessions we sat in at the table where people are talking about things as if they're new technologies, especially when it comes to robotics and like dishwashing and stuff. And wait a minute, this is, I'm listening to somebody who's saying, we got to let it shake itself out. I'm like, wait a minute. They're using that in manufacturing already, in food manufacturing, those robots in there. So why are we having the conversation about being sanitary and meeting health codes? And so you're pointing out that sometimes, by the way, maybe taking a break and going to a different place helps the perspective.
Yeah, it totally has, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity, I've done some work in consulting in my career with medical practices and billing and so forth. And I'm always amazed at not just all the new things I learned that I can bring back to my passion, which is kind of the restaurant industry, but how much of what we do in the restaurant industry really isn't all that different than what's happening in other industries. In fact, so Rob, you may have heard, for one of the first times that I actually started in multi-unit retail before I moved over to
I
Brinker back in
did
the
hear that, and I was
1990s.
going to bring that up.
And in the 1990s, restaurants were well rumored, and there was a lot of truth to it, to be behind
They
where
always say that.
retail was, where retail technology was. And there's some reasons for that. When you look at retail, I mean, when I worked in the retail sector, UPN and barcodes were already fairly standardized and becoming even more so. And all your inventory, all your assets are tied up in your inventory that you're keeping on your shelves or in the warehouses or in transit. So it makes sense that, as your treasure goes, so goes your activities. If all your assets are tied up in inventory, you're going to put quite a bit of investment into tracking that inventory, reconciling that inventory, et cetera, et cetera. You move into the restaurant space and you only had enough inventory to last a few days, right? If you didn't sell it, it was going to spoil. So you never really had the same investments in technology on the restaurant side as you did on the retail side. Now, flash forward, I've been doing this over 30 years now. It's changed, and I do talk to quite a few of my retail, colleagues and so forth. And I'm owned by a private equity firm that we have other retailers within the portfolio. And some of the problems that they're dealing with are no different than the challenges I'm dealing with. And in many ways, I'm not burdened by some of the tech debt that they are because they're still working on systems that were implemented in, the 1990s that they've
Well,
not been able
by
to
the way, that's a
replace.
good point because if you have certain segments, like you look at the convenience store segment and you got gasoline pumps and stuff, and the integrations and number of systems are very limited. When you think about, it, I think you actually said this last week, as I think about the different businesses in food service that I know you've been in, food service operations are basically manufacturing plants.
Are.
And that's, but they're fresh food. You've already said the word waste in here, and you've talked about shelf life, whereas canned goods and retail items, they're sort of different. But without going down, let's say without I'm going to mention names, but I'm not looking to you to point to one or the other. But it occurred to me that you have some varied experiences within. Let's put aside the vendor side. We can have that conversation later. But if you think about it, you were with Panera. Panera was first really known for a great online ordering system. I think actually before Starbucks was in there, because I remember Panera 2.0 and I remember all the press that they got and the things like that. Then you, at one point, worked with all the systems that were working with McDonald's. And you think about everybody talks about McDonald's, the drive through. How many items do you have to serve in a single unit? And how many I remember one time somebody told me there were like 120 applications or something in McDonald's. So very complex environment and a broad menu, yet speed of service, drive through, right? Then you're working in the pizza business, which I would describe as very hard to do pizza and point of sale and stuff because all the mixes and combinations. And then you have the delivery routing. And now you're working in the chicken business. And what occurred to me from your conversation last week is there's kitchen timing. You can't, it's made fresh. So you can't just run out. You got to drive through there. So from those four things, there are four separate different challenges. Do you think that the industry today has actually, what's the most challenging, first of all, in there of industry segment? And then secondly, do you think the industry has figured it out where those challenges, are being taken care of?
Wow. I think my natural first reaction is every single one of the concepts I've ever worked for, they've all had their challenges and some bigger than others. McDonald's always impressed upon me, very early in my career, how scientific they were around speed of service. McDonald's at the time, I don't know, I would accuse them of this anymore. They're fairly nimble relative to the McDonald's I worked with back in 2000 to 2009. But they took forever to make decisions. And when they did, it was a juggernaut, and better get out of the way or you're going to get kind of flattened by it. But they took a long time to make decisions. And at first, I didn't quite understand that. We were a startup attached to McDonald's and partially owned by McDonald's. It would be a little frustrating. It's like, why do I got to go through 8 meetings just to get to the first level decision? But I actually began to really appreciate, because they were so hyper focused around their KPIs for speed of service and profitability and a number of other different things. QSC&V, everybody that has ever studied McDonald's probably knows, quality, service, convenience, and value. Those were always a big part of who they were, to the point where when it was time for us to start, testing our software in their particular environment, they finally took me down to one of their locations, and I won't mention where it's at. Many people know, where they basically had 3 converted warehouses converted into full-size mock McDonald's. And you had catwalks and a bunch of lab-coated individuals walking around. And anything you would test had to be tested under a very rigid scientific testing model. If they wanted to change the number of fries in the portion that would go into the container, I really don't think I'm exaggerating, because I remember having this combo one time. They literally would test that. How many people are going to order that one? What is the impact to speed of service? Sometimes measured in seconds, sometimes measured in milliseconds, because they realize that keeping their factory, their kitchen humming at top efficiency, it's how you drive volume, it's how you drive profitability. So they took it serious, and they would measure like 20 times before they would cut once. But when they cut, they would go very, very strong and very fast. So for an organization of that size, their challenge was making decisions faster and being able to respond to market economics, I think,
but it's
faster.
also a global environment. So what they do in one with people traveling, the expectation is globally certain things are going to be found around the world.
And at the same time, their marketing team floored me. I mean, we all have admired McDonald's marketing over the years. They probably have had some of the most memorable campaigns in the history of the brands that are out there. I think I quoted one at the beginning, hold the pickles and hold the lettuce, right? I remember hearing that as a kid, and it stuck with me my whole life. But
wait a minute. Wait a
minute.
Different chain. King, right? That's it. I was going to point that out to you in the beginning when you brought that up. I'm like, I didn't realize that we had Burger King in the background here.
No, that's good. That's rich. Okay, well, 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Toasted sesame seed bun. You got
that's right. So made that up there. But when you stop and think about how powerful their marketing engine was, and yet when I met them in 2000, they couldn't tell you how many Big Macs they were selling. They literally couldn't. They had no idea where all that data was coming in or what segments they were selling it to. This is pre-CDP and pre-MarTech stack. They just didn't know. And so they were making a lot of very good, educated, talented guesses about how to move the brand forward. And, I look at companies like that. Okay, that's a whole type of challenge. And then I move over to Panera.
Hang on just a second. Yeah. Let's just take a quick break, because I think you started with the big one. And so then let's go take a look and see how that filtered down, because they clearly were a market leader and are a market leader in technology and all other areas and global. So let's just take a break and we'll come right back. I'm having a conversation with Mike Nettles, the Chief Technology Officer of Zaxby's, and we'll be right back.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
So welcome back, and I've got Mike Nettles, the Chief Technology Officer of Zaxby's Franchising, joining me today, an old friend and many conversations, although it's been a while, as he pointed out, except for last week. So we had an overview sort of the McDonald's, the leader, tech leader, food leader, global leader, in the industry. And now you are going to share with us some of your other experiences, Panera, Zaxby's, Papa John's, and how that all fits together. As you've said, each company has its tech challenges.
Sure. So moving on, many years later, after working with McDonald's and some others, I end up at Panera. And when I got to Panera, they didn't have much of a breakfast day part outside of bagels and coffee. They didn't really have a hot breakfast item. The sandwich category wasn't really in full bloom yet. They may have had a few one-off tests, but breakfast was bagels and coffee and baked goods. And they were more focused on the retail side of the business, really, or what we call the retail side. But they had a massive lunch business. I mean, lunch would hit, and I remember visiting stores early in my career at Panera and actually taking a little golf counter. That's showing my age, how long ago this was, and counting the number of people that walked in the store, shook their head, and walked right back out. And it's because the line was so long at the front counter that people knew they only had 30 minutes for lunch, and it was going to take them 30 minutes just to get through the line. Most Paneras didn't have drive-throughs at that particular time. They were mostly inline locations. Well, come to find out, that grouping of people at the front counter sometimes also included people down in what we called the mosh pit at the end of the line. So Panera, you place your order and you'd move down the line, and then they would hand your order out to them. So you ended up with a compounded problem of queue management inside of a store, and they just didn't have the throughput in order to take care of the capacity and the demand that was coming. That's a good problem to have, but you as a restaurateur would never want to turn away a sale. So, a big part of their technology challenges early on, which ultimately led to kiosk development, was how do you bust that queue and actually get the line moving faster so that you have less of a reason for people to walk in the front door, shake their head, and turn around and leave because they're not looking at a Six Flags queue, when they're trying to get through and get their lunch order. Well, we got it faster going through the queue, but then that shifted more impact to the mosh pit where people were picking up. The beverage station was down there, and they tried to give them their cup and say, go grab your drink while we're getting your food.
We are talking about before online ordering, right?
Before online ordering.
Okay.
So
because that's a whole different subject problems. In this one.
Yeah, these are all the business problems that you're trying to solve. Kiosk came about to break the queue. Later, the whole concept of how we put a kitchen system in for the production and the make line so that you could literally make sure that you were getting the food out as fast as you could. I mean, when I first got there, they didn't have, a KDS system. They were still running paper checks and, call out orders down the line. Really starting to look at what was then a menu innovation, the you pick two, pick a half a sandwich and pick a half a soup. And as a result of it, you now have totally exploded the amount of complexity in the kitchen. Kiosks actually introduced yet another concept, which was people could start to make all kinds of crazy modifiers to their salads and sandwiches.
Just a second on that one. I would tell you that the catering, when I talk about catering of people and I talk about Panera, before that, people, and even when you did online ordering, they said it was one-to-one ordering, then it was group ordering, and then you have catering ordering, and people thought they were all the same. And whether it was in the store or whether it was out of the store, Panera really showed the way that there were almost three different systems.
They're totally three different systems. In fact, factually, catering was its own system. It had its own website, its own, at one point, its own concierge kind of call center model, to kind of augment the website. It flowed through as a different channel. The kiosks were our first foray into kind of a self-service POS. Mobile, you might say, well, why didn't you just go to mobile apps? Guys, this was 2012. Mobile was still kind of coming into its own, but we did rapidly go over to mobile. But what we started finding out, there were a large number of our customers, particularly our older demographic, who had not yet adopted mobile phone ordering. And as a result, the kiosk was a friendlier invite to continue kind of that walk-up queue busting type of traffic. So before you knew it, you had a chain that we started to solve one problem, but it's kind of like squeezing the balloon, right? As you squeeze the balloon, it goes to a different part. And we started realizing we need these investments, which became Panera 2.0, to truly transform the way guests interacted with the brand. And it opened so many new opportunities. Breakfast took off. Breakfast became this really great day part. People could order ahead, pick it up quickly. The retail bakery actually became kind of this different animal, right? It had been our primary
areas, right?
Yeah, it actually ends up being, okay, how do we use the baked goods as loyalty incentives? And you probably have experienced that at the Panera counter. Hey, Rob, welcome, and we see that you've earned enough for a free baked good. You want a cookie? Do you want a cupcake or whatever else happened to be there? Little secret, a lot of times we're just trying to push product that didn't sell that morning, right? So there were lots of things that came out of that in terms of business transformation And I got to give full credit back where credit is due. We had a CEO, Ron Shake, at the time, founder of the brand. He had a
I was
lot of
going to ask
vision
you.
for this, tons of passion for it. I can still remember conversations
Well,
with
you
Ron and
developed your own
others.
systems, so you got to have a CEO in a company that's that size to go
Exactly.
ahead and make that investment. So that was sort of visionary. And then I don't know that they wouldn't do that necessarily today, but at that time they needed to do something that, much like the pizza guys, which will be our
Yeah.
segue there, but that they couldn't find what they needed. They needed to do something different. I will tell you that the one impression in the early days of 2.0 that I saw was, I used to talk to a lot of people who said, you know what, though, we're queuing up now, and we didn't realize that we needed to also reconfigure the kitchen and how we were taking the orders and how we were doing them. And then you have already talked about catering and bakery, that opened up some other issues as well, because you add that volume and people expect to be served very quickly, and hence line busting, queuing, everything else.
Yeah. And you know what? The language in our business, it's never an issue, it's an opportunity, right? It really was an example, though, where one opportunity begat several others. And, it fueled a many years product roadmap, very large investment. I mean, it paid off. They were purchased by JAB eventually. And, it became kind of the playbook, I think, for a lot of other brands that wanted to follow it. But it's interesting because I moved to pizza next, and a lot of people give a lot of credit, to Panera for what they did with their brand, and others that came along that, Starbucks and so forth, that did some equally really big things. Remember, pizza was selling on the web in 2000. I mean, they
I
were
gave
some of the
I
first
gave the
players.
three pizza companies an award at FS Tech once for innovation because we couldn't decide between one. So we
Yeah.
brought them all three up on the stage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Pizza Hut, Domino's, and Papa John's all were selling pizza on the web as early as 2000. I know Papa John's went to
Right.
1999, actually. I think the others, one of them, I thought it was Pizza Hut, actually had a Prodigy site, if you can remember that, or AOL or something where you could order it from them. But, it wasn't a huge part of the business until about probably 2004, 2005, when it really started taking off. And then you start seeing almost all of the pizza players had to make an undue amount of investment in their technology. And pizza's very different. You've already mentioned yourself. In a POS for quick service or even table service, you tend to order by what we call PLUs, right? Price lookup. So I need to know, you want a hamburger, you want a combo, you got to make your modifiers, et cetera, et cetera. Pizza usually starts more with the carrier, or what I consider the size. It's a large, it's a medium, and then there's a modifier for that. It's a thick crust, thin crust, hand tossed, whatever seasoning you're going to put on it. Maybe it's a stuffed crust. And then you build your ingredients on top of it. So it's very much a bill of material inverted model for pizza. Whereas in the rest of the restaurant space, you're selling more pre-made meals or
How many
entrees.
different combinations? Do you have
Oh
any
my
idea how
God.
many different combinations? I mean, I don't know what the secret menu at Starbucks is, but it's, somebody said 15, 20,000. I don't know, combinations. But how many combinations can you really do on a pizza, especially if you're looking at it worldwide and
Yeah.
you have, in one place, you got barbecue chicken or corn on it, and somewhere, there must be,
Corn was a
I
huge
can't even
ingredient in the
imagine.
Middle East. Yeah, yeah. No, we did the math one time, and it was easily in the 40 million range when you consider all the sizes, all the sauces, all the ingredients, all the portioning halves. Remember, in pizza you can do half and half, or
You can do
full
quarters.
pizza,
Can you do
or
a quarter?
double, or mild, or light. So when you take
Yeah.
all of those,
But you already should have known this, because if you came from retail, you know about SKU numbers and style, color, and size.
yeah,
The
yeah.
only difference is it's not edible and it'll last on the shelf a little bit longer.
Well, and there you go back to similarities. We think we're radically different, but in many cases, look, I've had some great success talking to, I won't name them, but to retail only technology vendors that I've bumped into. That it's like, that's really interesting what you're doing, and I've got a problem in the restaurant industry, and they're like, well, we don't do restaurants, we only do retail. I'm like, no, no, let's listen
No,
for a
but you
minute,
can take
let's
the
talk about it.
software and carry it over. They just,
Yeah, and they've been
you
able
know,
to carry it over. I ran into a Vision AI inventory management solution not too long ago, and it started in the retail space, understandably, because again, you've got all your assets tied up in retail. Although these days, a lot of those assets are now actually being put out there on consignment. You're not actually owning the inventory until it's
Right.
sold. But it's, even that model has changed. But basically, you can just, hold up your iPad type of device and it counts your inventory through Vision AI. And
Absolutely.
and so I
It's
was,
funny because we had a video on that last week in one of the other sessions in food safety, and I showed them from Kroger, a retail AI on wheels. And by the
yeah,
way, people think you got to spend a lot of money. You're absolutely right. You can put an iPad on wheels, just like you can for a kiosk,
yeah,
and you can have it go there, but it can know temperature. It
yeah,
can go do visioning and pick out what's there. It can
yeah,
look at barcodes and look at your, expiration dates. And
yeah.
we just don't think about all those things yet. You might use it at home that way,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Just like I borrow pretty liberally from manufacturing for metaphors and so forth, because I do think restaurants are manufacturing in the back of house predominantly. Guest services on the front or at the edge where you meet the guests, but in the kitchen, it's hardcore manufacturing 101, processes for speed of service and cleanliness and accuracy and limiting waste and all the things that go with it. This solution for retail, I actually found out pretty quick. The sales rep I was talking to is like, well, we only do retail. Another sales rep stuck his head in there and said, I don't know. I'm doing this for like 5 or 6 restaurant companies. They
There you
go in the
go. They
back,
don't
they
know.
go
One hand
in the
doesn't know,
reefer
right?
unit, and they do a scan, and it basically counts their inventory for them, and you're done. I mean, the system does it as opposed to the manager there till 2 a.m. opening up crates while wearing a parka, trying to count down, how many
That's
chicken
right.
tenders they
And
have
if you
left.
put a camera in the walk-in, besides some of the other things you might catch there when I was a restaurant manager, but besides that, um, you can actually do this. So look, now you shifted to chicken, and you've got the drive-through, you've got cooking times, you have these things as well. So I suppose they have their own set of challenges.
Well, they do, and I'm kind of back in my QSR wheelhouse again, and I learned a ton working with McDonald's, particularly around the world, because McDonald's had different service operating models depending upon what part of the world you're in and what type of food they were selling. They really did sell differentiated product in Japan and Asia, and
Right.
than they did in downtown Chicago. So your menu would change, and their operating service model would with it. So the concept of configurability really was kind of built into all of our architecture and everything that we developed for them, because we knew we had to be very portable across all these markets. So coming into Zaxby's, it's been very standardized. The company's been around since the early 1990s, hadn't really changed in 30 years. Somehow or other, they never really got excited about digital, and so they didn't make any large investments in any of their technology. Their POS, Rob, as I mentioned to you, was the same POS you and I were talking to them about back in 2008, 2009, when our paths once crossed. And, we actually were down here talking to the Athens team, and they made a decision to put in a POS system, and that POS system was the last major investment they had actually made. So I looked at it as truly a greenfield opportunity. Here's a company that had massive technical debt, and largely because they just had not made any investments in it in a long period of time, and yet therefore could benefit rapidly from the implementation of what I like to consider a lot of the fast follower technology that's out there. I didn't have to be bleeding edge to really help this organization generate the
But
value
they
that
also knew that they needed to make the leap, which means that you don't have to do it slowly while you get people to buy in, because they know that they need a major change.
the pain was there. Some franchisees, I think it was a more realistic pain than others, but across the system, it literally was one of these. Hey, we know we need to catch up. We know we're very very behind. Where do we start? And that actually was the hardest question: is where do you start? So we did a number of things over the last few years. We replaced the point of sale system extremely rapidly. We swapped out the whole system in 1 year. We built a proprietary digital platform, although I leveraged several common off-the-shelf components to try to build it. The core code is ours. The whole back end is ours. We built a data lake because I knew I needed to start storing all this data so that we could build a MarTech solution that would kind of come as a fast follow with a CDP and an automated campaign system, and really start to retool and re-educate our internal teams to really start thinking about being in the business to consumer business, as well as for my franchisees, the B2B business, which I think a lot of people miss out on. If you operate in a franchise environment, which I've had the fortune of doing pretty much my entire career, you have two customers. You have the consumer, and in digital technology, people are actually touching the consumer with the products that we're developing. But you also are responsible for making another business owner successful. So your
Right.
franchisees are the B2B side of that equation. And it's not just about building things that make their stores run better, but things that they actually can look at to say, wow, I'm more profitable now than I've ever been in the history of the brand. Give me some more of that so that you can then start hitting the innovation cycles and a lot of things that go along with it. But Rob, it is, I'd love to tell you there's some secret sauce. It's really the application
Secret
of
sauce,
industry
by
best
the way, is a
practices.
McDonald's term. You're back on track, so that's
I have more
okay.
sauces than McDonald's does, so I'll see them on that one. But
There you
we
go.
we we believe that keeping it saucy is a big part of who we are. It's always been a big part of our brand identity. You can have all these items like tossed in sauce, dipped in sauce, mixture sauces. It's a big part of our flavor profile that we think makes Zaxby's unique and different. But ultimately, what really this comes down to is best practices. Most of my stores are single lane, single window drive through, and just because of real estate restrictions, they probably will be for years to come. My new stores, dual lane, Y merge, digital menu boards, et cetera, et cetera. So I actually have to build solutions that kind of
Right.
meet the restaurants where they are, but that also can lean into and even exploit, new technology. I've got kiosks out there now, digital menu boards, our own app, our own marketing technology, but it needs to address the consumers the same, regardless of the service models I need to support in the
But
restaurant,
listen, here's
just
here's
because
what
of
I
their.
figured out. So we started in QSR where you're not over yet, but you did the QSR. We never actually got to the conversation on the being on the supplier side, the dark side, as some people might do it. So we may need to save that for the next conversation we have. But I think you've shared with us a lot of perspective as you've seen over the years. But the one thing that I've gotten out of this is there's a lot to learn from different industries. You've certainly brought that with you in each place. You've pointed out to us that each industry is not necessarily more complex or challenging than the other. They each have their nuances that when we don't find innovation. But the one lasting thing I would leave, besides the saucy conversation we just had, the one thing I would leave on this that I am taking away is that the restaurant industry is no longer lagging behind retail. People are following us on what we're doing because of drive-through choice, manufacturing, and the complexity of what we're doing. Would you say that?
Absolutely agree. In fact, I'd go as far as to say we're doing more with real time, discrete product manufacturing at a modernized level than almost any other player or industry that's out there. I mean, maybe healthcare is the only other one I can think of where you come in, you get diagnosed, and they're quickly applying the right
But they're
resources
so
or meds.
regulated that
Yeah,
that's
yeah, but that's
something else,
regulated,
right?
right? And
And
we're
so
doing
that
it.
so we have innovation going on, and we have innovation that happens shift by shift, and we're nimble, and we do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So Mike, with that, I mean, we could go on, and we're going to have to do a follow up, but maybe we'll do it at a show or something like that. It might be a good thing. Give me another excuse to hang out with you. So I want to thank you for joining me on TechBytes today. Mike Nettles, the Chief Technology Officer of Zaxby's Franchising, an old friend, but you can hear, what a not just a history, but a learning piece that he's taking forward and what he's doing. So thank you for joining us on TechBytes.
It's been my privilege and pleasure. Thank you very much.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of food service, hospitality, and retail technology, providing thought leadership as your single, impartial, and go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share in conversations like the one we're having today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of TechBytes, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.